So to bring it back, honestly, like you said like way before that Lisa was the protagonist and Julia sort of became the protagonist later on. But honestly, I see it as Lisa was the antagonist all the way through, and you focused on her, and then you shifted focus to the actual protagonist of Julia.
Mm.
So, the other part of the thought drifted away from me. God damn it. But I have something else for it. So Lisa is such a master manipulator when it comes to everyday people. Were there any times where you imagine Lisa would lose control of a situation, how she would react to it?
Uh, it's an interesting question. Um, in terms of what would happen, we see a little bit of that just in the way of first the initial, you know, sort of second wedgie that comes out of well, it's sort of planned but not planned, and then we get the full one that just isn't planned at all, which is Julie giving her the frontal in public, and she sort of, I think, in general, would sort of take it and run with it, as she sort of did in the few instances that did happen. In terms of like, okay, if you want to give me, like, if you want to, like, I'm pretty sure in response to that, she's like, all right, like, I'm in, like, fucking, you want to give me wedgies? Fuck yeah. Like, I'm gonna you think you're done with me? I'm gonna force you to do it. I'm not gonna submit the project. I'm gonna go to your house, and you're gonna give me one, or else I don't submit it. Like, she sort of like rolls with it and uses it to her advantage. I think if there were, obviously in the alternate ending, that's a sort of a situation where it's, it's kind of lost at that point. Um, but I think she would always try and roll with it and keep trying. And even in the alternate ending, even when Julia would, even if she did blatantly just refuse, she would still try and wrangle her back. It would be a rare time if Lisa would ever just sort of roll over or panic. And I think it would be interesting to see that level of control just blatantly taken away, and sort of how she'd be able to sort of find her way. But I sort of set her up, and her role is to be that sort of controlling force. So I wasn't really in a position to try and take that away. It was more so just about Julia being the one that wasn't in control.
Hmm.
So it would actually be an interesting little case study to see what would have happened if I don't know, somehow Julia exposed Lisa for the fetish in some way, or used it against her, or something
Yeah.
like that. It would have been interesting to see how she would have done it. But knowing me, she would have came out on top.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, it is. It is a very interesting look at her character. Is like the fact that she is so controlling and manipulative, and yet the thing that drives her sexuality and what pushes her on to continue to pursue
mm,
Julia is, as I said in the previous Two Worlds episode, is, and you can I would love if you would speak on this, is it's not, what I see is that she's not, her sexuality is not the her interest in the wedgies, I guess. It really is not the wedgie itself, it's the domination aspect. And with that comes, like, she wants to be the sub in that
yeah,
dynamic, but with that comes letting go of control. And
yeah,
like, that is completely opposite to who she is. And I think, like, thinking about it now, because I didn't think about this before at all, and I think that's a lot of what I've said in this podcast. That, like, that you said is like, that's really interesting, or like, that's a really good thought. Like, a lot of those things that you've talked on is like that I've thought of that in the moment, just talking with you. And this is one of those things, is like, now that I'm thinking about it, and thinking on the story and what you said is like that this is really driving me more towards Lisa. I mean, Julie at the end of the day is my favorite
Yeah.
character from the story, but
Yep.
it this thought I had, and I'm prefacing so much, but I'm going to keep talking.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
um,
Go ahead.
so like it's I would wager that 99% of people across the board, how they are as people in life in general, is the complete opposite and
Yes.
mirror reflection of who
Yes.
they are in their sexuality. And I've experienced that, I've seen that. And that I've never thought about that before until just now, but that I think that one thought above all else really drives the idea. It really helps me picture Lisa as a fully fleshed out and real human being. And that is fantastic. And I
Mm.
don't think I would have gotten that thought without talking to you.
I'm glad you came to it.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
the main thing I can speak on for that is one of the big inspirations for even just some people who would have that sort of fetish is a large proportion of people who have that fetish of wanting to be dominated are people like CEOs, big bosses, and sort of people that have a lot of control. And obviously, there's people who are into it that don't have a lot of control in their life, but there are people who, in general, like you were saying, are the mirror opposite of that fetish and having that, and usually have that control and relish in having it taken away from them. But I do think, though, that it is there is a line there because I think if people who were into that sort of domination just wanted it all the time, well, to be frank, they wouldn't be CEOs. They wouldn't be
Right.
highfalutin business people. There is a line there where it's like a controlled uncontrolling. Like it's like
Yeah.
I want give me this amount of like give me this specific instance with this person in this scenario where nobody will know. It'll just between us with everything taken care of, with the blinds closed, the doors, things, and the children put to bed. I want just anything,
Mm.
anything, and that sort of giving of control is really what I wanted to give Lisa, but at the same time, again, it's not like I wouldn't want somebody to think, well, if she's in the domination so much, why is she so controlling of Julia? No, no, no. She wants she wants that, but she wants it in her way, and she doesn't want Julia to yell at her and constantly walk away from her and do whatever. She wants to convince her that, well, not convince her. She wants them to be together so that they can have that scene that they have at the end in the snow. That's the
Yeah.
ultimate. Two people in that sort of way living out that fantasy. And I think that distinction is really important, and it lends itself to very interesting scenarios, which is what you brought up. Where what if that line was ever crossed? What if the domination went too far for her? What is too far for her? What level of control do you actually want? How controlled is this uncontrolled situation? Like it's there's a lot of interesting questions that I think could actually be somewhat answered in real life BDSM communities where people who like to be dominated, like how much, like, do you want it do you want it like how much off the rails do you want it? Like, is it like, oh, I would love the thrill and the risk of somebody coming in, or is that like completely off limits? It's an interesting thing, and I think touches upon real life, which is what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the major reasons why this story has stuck with people for so long, because there are so many instances in it that speak so well to true life.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I tried to do. I mean, them fucking them I think the reason why a lot of people see the early chapters as being super realistic is because I was modeling off of shit that I was doing at the time, like a research project. I was doing those research projects. Like I sort of got the vibe of how like people would somewhat interact in that sort of setting. Like it's easiest, but it's also the most realistic and rewarding to base it off stuff that you encounter like directly in your own sort of life. Now, granted, Lisa, I consider larger than life, but in some ways, but she's still grounded in a very human and very real experience that can be related to, you know, people that we who we would know and interact with ourselves, which is which is really great.
Yeah, and I mean, just even just disregarding everything, but the impact and the legacy that these two stories that I'm going to bring up have had on people. I think you can hold your head up and stand shoulder to shoulder with Hans when you compare Lucy and Daniela and Two Worlds. Obviously, very obviously, I am super biased towards Lucy and Daniela. If you listen to the Lucy and Daniela episodes of the podcast, but
Great story. It's a great story.
I'm not going to go into it because I've said everything in those two episodes. um, although I will say one thing: if anybody can come up with a single thing, a single fault that they think exists in that story, I will easily be able to fight back and prove you wrong.
Next
open
episode.
Open challenge for any single for anybody out there ever.
Single fault?
Anything you can find that you think is wrong with the story, it is an open challenge, and I will show you how it is actually a great thing, how it works to the story's benefit. So, as
I'm absolutely gonna. I break Hans' balls is too much not to try and take that up.
Absolutely,
Fine.
yeah.
I'm absolutely gonna
It's
try to do that.
It is an open challenge for anybody to pursue, and I guarantee I'll win. So, to my point, I think you were partially inspired by Lucy and Daniela, and you saw that people can do crazy things and they can actually produce a fantastic story. And I think Two Worlds, because especially Two Worlds was your first story. Lucy and Daniela was Hans' first story.
Yeah.
Both of you can you can stand shoulder to shoulder with him. I think yeah,
I have in real life.
Well, okay, all right, yeah. Okay.
We've stood next to each other.
Physically, sorry, yes, but I'm saying physically you have, but I think metaphorically you can as well. Because truly, this is one of the classics. It's considered by so many, and I was gonna say this later on, but I think it's a good time to bring it up now. When this story came out, and when especially when you finished it, when it was done, I think to many, especially looking at the views that Two Worlds got versus other stories, I know you don't care about that. And I'm also going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
I think that really speaks to the fact that at the time when Two Worlds was done, you were in this community, you were a writer's writer. Looking at the views.
If you had told me that 5 years ago, that would have been my tagline for the past 5 years.
And so I'll explain that for anybody who doesn't understand that. But just looking at the views that it has against other major stories that came out at the same time, versus the impact and legacy it's had on some of the biggest names in this community. A writer's writer, essentially, it's kind of like a term that you can use in sort of any area of life, but it's like the person who might not necessarily be as appreciated and acclaimed as they should be amongst the audience, but among their peers, they get insane recognition. Like they are known as one of the best, and you absolutely like you 100% delivered on this first story. Disregard everything that I said. I mean, I mean,
Uh-oh.
I hope you take what I said in the first Two Worlds episode as constructive criticism, because
I
that's what
do.
I was intending it to be.
I do. I do. I do.
But and that I mean no, I said that before, so I won't qualify myself. It really was just it so different from anything that I'd seen before, and I think that really is one of the hallmark. Like I think stories like this that came out at the time, to bring it back to the Renaissance idea that I'm always promoting, and I think like that stories like this are they show like 2011, like they showed what the possibilities were, and then 2015 slash partial 2016, I guess really our class of writers, if you think about it like a rap sense, like you have classes, um our class of writers, um god damn it, why does this always happen to me?
It's all right. I mean, it's a no. It's like
No, that's a
it's a
Canadian
definite.
coming out and you saying sorry for nothing.
It's true. That's very true. That's very true. I apologize.
No, don't. Oh my god. All right.
I just,
Well, all right. Let's. All right. So I'm just curious, in a general sense, why you wrote an alternate ending at all in the first place.
um, it's first of all, I just want to acknowledge the kind words that you said, and it obviously, as much as it's never been my primary purpose to get views. I'm not a fool. I am very aware that my stories are much less, sort of viewed in the ether of the in terms of the wedgie fetish. But it's nice to know that at least in this sort of corner, which I consider this corner to be probably one of the best meeting of the minds for the entire fetish and the entire community, that it's appreciated and remembered. And again, for any writer who puts their blood, sweat, and tears into a story to have any sort of impact, is something I'm hugely thankful for. So thank you. But to get to your actual question here, in terms of wanting to write an alternate, again, some of the motivation is honestly hazy in my mind.
Hmm.
But I just specifically remember it was in the midst, like I hadn't finished writing the canon ending when I thought to myself, well, what if it was like this? And like, what if it was like an alternate? And then again, I think it was just because of those feelings of like, maybe this isn't like not right, but like maybe this there's a different outcome that's preferred here. Like maybe maybe Lisa shouldn't just win. Like
Hmm.
maybe there should be something else that's there. But I had my
Oh.
I had my threads that I wanted to finish up, so I thought, fuck it. I'll just have an alternate.
Hmm. So it sounds like you had some shreds of doubt as to whether the canon ending would be the true ending.
I try to sow the seeds in there,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
listen, the no, I knew what I needed to accomplish in the chat, in like I set myself like it wasn't even like the when I was writing the last one, it halfway through writing it, I didn't think that the next chapter was going to be like the absolute last one. It was when I was finishing it as I was writing, as getting ideas for friend sessions, that I was like, ah, fuck this. There's no more of this. So let me just. I'll just end this next chapter. So of course, there is like a somewhat feeling of like, you know, what would have been there, then what would have fit, whatever. And those feelings did probably manifest when I was writing the very last one, and sort of realized that maybe it is better for Julia just to walk away. But it wasn't enough. Like there's no shot that I was making that my fucking final ending. Like there's
Ah,
no way.
hmm. I mean, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get to the end of Fortunate Events. And Hans, if you're listening, I'm sure that's gonna
Yes.
kill you because he is probably the biggest fan of that story. Um, but I I did talk about this before, where
Yeah.
like I don't remember what it was about. Where I I like having stories have happy endings, but at the same time, I like to write stories that have either melancholy endings or have terrible endings that
All
give
right.
all the resolution that people want, but not in the way that they want. So like that is kind of why that's a partial reason why I like the alternate ending.
Okay. Well, yeah. I think that's the whole sort of thing, is that I think it's an innately subjective
Oh,
idea. Oh, you remembered it?
I remembered a thought from way before. Um,
All right. Fuck what I was just saying. It's subjective, and I like the
so
ending. I like. Go
so
ahead.
Lisa is like honestly, I think like Lisa is portrayed as the villain from the very beginning, and Julie is the protagonist from the very beginning, and so it feels like the canon ending that you give feels like the villain wins at the end, and yet it's you do it in a way that feels like it's a feel good and happy ending,
Yeah.
whereas it's like it's when I think about it, it's kind of groundbreaking in a way. Like the villain, like we're cheering because not me specifically, but most like people who like the canon ending are cheering because essentially they're cheering because the villain wins, but it is a feel good ending, which is what most people want out of a story. And yet, the alt ending is where the protagonist wins,
And it's the
and yet
shitty one.
it's not no, because it's I think it's written so much better when you look at the
Like
whole of the
shitty, I mean, in
story.
terms of like, yeah.
It's weird to look at. That
Yeah,
was
I
my
mean,
thought from
it's.
way before.
Well, I think it's a decent point. I think one could definitely argue that Two Worlds is the one where the villain wins.
Yes.
But it's, I guess, and again, partly just because we don't have that explanation, that we're allowed to sort of have these arguments of, is it like, was it, and again, like, did the villain just win? Because we don't know how Lisa truly felt before going into this. So was this whole thing one last big scheme, or was this a genuine sort of wanting to allow Julia to accept who she is? We don't know. And I think again, it came from circumstance of me just wanting to finish the story, but I think it actually helps with this sort of dialogue. And I think you could either interpret it as, you know, again, Lisa using her manipulation to do a good thing, in terms of like to get Julia to accept herself. You could view it as, Lisa finally having some compassion, and how, I know you talked about it on the podcast, and how she comes off as like a misanthrope, and then she has this. I think there's just because of the way it's done at the very end, you could argue that it's finally a sort of acceptance of somebody else, because she does say that Julia sort of gives her something that nobody else ever has, so you can interpret it as that, or you could just interpret it as like I was saying earlier, one last like Julia fell for it one last time, like Lisa was able to do that. So I think in that being able to interpret it as yeah, we literally I never actually thought of it until you put it like that, where the canon happy ending is where the antagonist wins,
Yeah.
and the like I when I say shitty, I meant like depressing. Like the
Okay.
more like cut offish like ending is actually the one where the like protagonist wins. That's actually I don't know. That's kind of that's an interesting dynamic I didn't think of.
Yeah, it's that is absolutely what I see the story as, is the villain winning. Because you
It's quite
put
a
her
story.
like, how can anybody who is really good manipulate people like that to the extent that she does? Because like when we're talking, like if we talk about like Death Note, Light in the
Mm,
beginning was really good.
yep.
He wanted to do good. He wanted to help the world, and then he was twisted and corrupted by the power, and he eventually wanted to be the god of the new world.
Yep.
And god damn it.
You're
Oh,
almost
I
there.
hate this.
You're almost there.
No, I'm not. Not anymore.
Oh, it's
Whatever. I have other things to talk about, so it's okay. This is why I type out notes. So I have things to fall back upon in case things like this happen. How did you
it's just you're
feel?
just
How did you feel after the story officially ended?
oh it felt great. It felt great to finish it, and I think there were some really nice comments left on the final chapter, which was really great. Um, and it felt awesome, but more than anything, it was a motivation for like again I the last chapter sort of hit me with like this is what I like, this is what I want to write, and that's the whole thing. It's this is what I want to write. Like I want to keep writing. I want to keep going. And I want to use what I learned here, but just to do it like times 5 or times 10 in whatever I would do later. So I sort of took that foundation and used it to propel myself, and it was a huge just confidence boost in general. And it was such an awakening for me. Like I this is such a fucking anecdotal. It sounds like some shit out of a feel good rom com from 2012. But like when I was in elementary school, there was a we had to we read the story The Giver. Did you ever have to read The Giver in elementary
Yes, and
school?
I hate it. I still don't like it. I think it's so dumb.
You notice I don't count that as the books that I've read. I don't count books at school as books that I've read because I have no recollection of it whatsoever. I have
The
literally no
all
idea what
I will
happened.
I will tell you the ending. The guy, no, because I slightly remember it, but not quite. It's just a
He's
bad.
going down a sled.
It's basically
He's going
like
down a sled.
it goes a little bit further than that. It's basically like if you were to take the ending of 1984, but leave it on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, it was a cliffhanger.
It was. I don't think it was ended well at all.
Funny you should mention that. The thing we had to do in elementary school was actually had to write a continuation, a next chapter
Oh God. Ugh.
for The Giver. And I completely rewrote the script. I wrote something about how it was like a post-apocalyptic world and like beyond whatever. I'm trying to remember what the fuck was there, but like I just I just completely rewrote it. Like and so it wasn't a good continuation at all because it literally felt like somebody was like, no, 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 now this is the story.
Well, it
But
kind
like
of basically was post-apocalyptic.
I'm sorry, I don't remember. I don't remember a thing. I wrote something because I just remember my character. They fall off of the sled, and then, or maybe I made the sled. I have no fucking clue.
Wait,
But then they like wake up in like some hunter's like dungeon, then escape, and then go to, then look outside and see like destroyed buildings and like the apocalypse and whatever outside. Again, I don't remember the giver enough to understand if that was either in line or without. But regardless, it was way different than everybody else fucking wrote because everyone else wrote some like basic fucking thing, and the teacher at the time, and I always remember him because he was a good influence on me. He said he's like, this isn't really like a continuation of the story, but it's very creative. And he said I showed it to I think his boyfriend or whatever that I forget his partner, and he said like he either is a writer or reads a lot or some shit like that, and he's like, and he thought it was really good, and I think you should. I think you should write. I think you should go into writing. And I know it sounds like some generic fucking rom com story, but I'm sorry it happened.
no,
And from
that's yeah.
there, and from there, I kind of figured I would always want to, but I never really got around to it. And then I discovered this community, and I, you know, decided to finally write. And as soon as I finished Two Worlds, that was like the sort of cementing in my mind of like, wait, I can do this, and like this is something that I actually kind of want to make it a part of my life, which is a huge moment for me personally, and something that's completely changed so much after that, just in terms of finally having an outlet for my creativity and finally having an outlet to tell stories, and something that for some is, you know, a nice creative outlet and a fun hobby, and for some people it's therapeutic and it's something that helps them. And I can definitely say writing has definitely helped me through things. So I would definitely say that the ending of Two Worlds helped me get to that place, and for that I'm forever thankful.
Yeah. Well, and so you had that moment with your teacher. I had a very, very similar moment with a teacher way back in grade school who pushed me on to write. So I like that.
Yeah, no, it's great that some of those teachers can be there for that. I think he preempted me with that because he gave me like an A minus instead of like an A plus. So he preempted me with that, just be like, listen, like it wasn't actually like what we asked you to do, but it was really good. We just can't give you perfect. So it was actually kind of like a funny thing in hindsight, but no, it
Yeah.
was definitely an impactful moment on me for sure.
Okay. So there's two pretty meaty thoughts to throw at you, but before that, I'd like to. I haven't done this in a little bit. I'm gonna throw at you this little segment. You might have heard it, you might not have. The Which Earth segment. The only segment I have in this entire podcast. That sometimes I remember, sometimes I forget.
Yes.
So basically, I split. This is my personal, not even a rating scale, but the way I see stories, the way they can be split up into is I see all of these stories that have been put out, are put out now, and will be put out in the future can be split into these four categories. You have realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth is changed to some degree, with wedgies being a center focus. Idealistic Earth, where Earth is changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community or some. Or fantastical Earth, where Earth is changed to be unrecognizable. So I'm curious where you believe Two Worlds falls.
So I hold this view for a lot of, and actually I remember you did this segment as well for the Two Worlds
Yes, I
podcast, which is
did.
very interesting. It was very interesting to hear as well. Um, I will be a staunch defender that it's realistic Earth, 100%. I because because the elements that make it seem fantastical. I mean, outside of I think the only like the main time is maybe you could argue like the public one, like that is a bit something that you probably wouldn't see, or maybe would be a little too much for somebody to maybe do in that moment. Like maybe that is a step too far in terms of like the psyche of things. But outside of that isolated moment, to think of something just because it's dramatic as being unrealistic is something that I have an issue with. I think
Hmm.
we have fantastical stories. I'm more of a movie guy than a book guy, so I always quote movies. But like like there are dramatic and fantastical sort of stories that are still set in the real world, and that can happen. Like I just, and this is again a very personal thing. I really don't like the idea that to make something realistic, you have to pull back. Like I mentioned that earlier, and it's really just a big thing in my mind to where like dramatic things happen in life. Like there are people that are overly dramatic, and like there are things that happen. So I think that 100% within the realm of a discovering the fetish and having somebody who is a natural sort of liar by nature and having somebody who has to discover herself and through the fetish, I'm sure, it's easy. And again, you guys came to the conclusion, and it's not like a terribly, like, I understand why people would think that in terms of it being an alternate, because things are sort of altered and, circumstances. And of course, it has to be with wedgies and shit like that. But like, it's just, to me, like, it has that drama, but it's still life. Like, life can be this dramatic, life can be this intense. And there are people who could act like this. So I think to say that just because it's a slightly more exceptional case, to say that it wouldn't exist in the same world as us, I staunchly go against that idea. So I think people are fine to disagree, and maybe you do consider the happenstance and circumstance of what happens and how, uh, you know, well, you could say how centralized it is about whiteies, but it's really not when it comes down to just homosexuality and domination and general fetishes. I I would 100% say it's realistic Earth, and I hold that view very very intensely from in terms of how I write and how I even just view the world.
Yeah, and I definitely think it goes in and out of that. Like there's solid ground where it definitely stays within realistic, and you said like like people focus on the wedge, like the story 100% focuses on the characters, like
Mm.
that.
Mm.
That's one of the reasons why I consider it one of the classics that like was one part of the golden era of the Renaissance, is
Mm.
because it's one of the stories that focused on characters instead of wedgies.
Def,
So
def,
a good portion of the time, it I think it does fall under realistic, but also I think it also does fall under alternate Earth, and I think there's like one or two moments where it does verge into
mm.
idealistic. I mean, just looking at like or like life in general, wedgies are not a normal thing to happen once you get into adulthood. It just does not normally happen as far as I've experienced.
Yet,
Yeah, I
yet.
mean, I do work it into my life and the people that I see and that kind of thing, but it's not something that I really. I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, but I don't know. It's tough to call
I
because
mean,
it.
you could
I think
even. I
I
mean, I think if you just change the parameter, you can see a lot of parallels. I mean, there are like directors like Quentin Tarantino who input their foot fetish into their movies. Now, if you said, "Oh, it's pretty fucking," wouldn't it be unrealistic if a big Hollywood director would put their fetish into like a big movie? It's like, well, that's it's a different fetish, but it's like I think just I know wedgies in specifically is not by any means the most popular fetish, and it's very much it warrants a huh. when people first kind of say it, like
Yeah.
I don't know, it was a thing. But if just a fetish in general, I think it's 100% realistic that it becomes an ingrained part of people's
Yes.
lives, and
Yeah.
then with potentially a dramatic. I mean, fuck, I would say it's an ingrained part of our lives. I know
Yes.
we're not exactly manipulating people out in the open,
Well, who knows? Who
but no,
knows?
I hope not. But no, that's really just the angle that I come from it with. I can
Yeah.
understand that as the way wedgies and specifically are now, to understand it as something that could just happen anytime. I understand that you could view that's a little too idealized or would have to take place in like a sort of alternate timeline.
Mhm.
I come from it from the angle of just of a fetish being able to have this sort of impact on people, and just because it's my fetish and how much wedgies have influenced me, like doing that in terms of two worlds. So to me, I'll always believe it as a realistic. But again, I'm not disregarding anybody who thinks otherwise. It's it's how I it's just it comes down to subjective and how I view
Right.
things and how everybody views things.
Yeah, and that's why I ask. I try to remember to ask everybody about stories that we talk about because everybody's view is gonna be different. And
It's a great question. It's a
yeah,
great question.
and the different Earths that I put out are not set in stone. Like I've changed them throughout the
Mm.
podcast, and they are still completely open to change. Like so, if anybody comes up with a better way to explain, or like, they come up with a different Earth, or they decide they come out with some factual way to declare that one of these things is completely inaccurate. I'm 100% open to these things.
I'll actually just quickly say on that on just the whole concept of the worlds in general. Just for my taste, the most erotic are always to me the idealized like wedgies are just like the
Absolutely.
fucking currency in this world. Like this
Yes.
is like oh no, another one each day. It's like oh yeah, like it's gotta be, man. To quote I think Hans, he said something about his the deal where it's like wedgies are on the billboards, like just like fucking. That's just how complex, and that is the most erotic. But the stories I enjoy the most, in terms of like from an actual literary standpoint, take place in the real world. I think that's sort of my general preference.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you with the wages of the currency. That's
Yeah.
idealistic Earth.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's just a little analytical approach, different,
It's
a little
nice.
bit of a different analytical approach to stories that I like to throw at people. So here's the only true fan theory that I've heard about this story,
There.
and it's
Finally.
probably one of the only fan theories I've ever heard about a story in general.
Yes.
And this comes from the writer JCCW. If we haven't talked about him
JCCW.
enough in this
Sorry.
podcast,
Apologize.
shut up, Canada.
Oh.
um, so he's got this theory that the entire story is just a two-person play, and there's a couple of parts that really drive that theory. Specifically at the end, where, and I did reference them in the previous Two Worlds episode. Um, like with the end of the story, the canon ending where the lights slowly go out and the curtains close on these two figures. Are those parts described? Are they literal or figurative slash poetic?
I don't want you. I don't want to be the guy to. I don't want to be the guy to. You said earlier. The author, the writer, is the one who, sort of has somewhat authority over like the canon of things. So
You
I'd hate
are.
to like put anything. I'd hate to put anything down. Um, but it was entirely figurative when I
Yes.
uh,
See, you have all like, yeah. I mean, yeah. It's nice to fuel the people's theories, but at the same time, you know what's
um
true and what's not. So,
I think actually you to be honest, you actually touched upon a really interesting point when you put it in the podcast to where I think a lot of writers sometimes write an ending for themselves,
mm,
and a lot of times it's like, yeah, like this story is closed. Like for me, like I don't have to write anymore. Like I think a lot of times writers write because they're losing these characters, and I think I just put it when I thought of like a big analogy. I mean, what more fitting than literally like the show's over? Like
mm,
that's it. Now, of course, I don't mean it literally. Then, like, it wasn't real, but like that's it. It's done. And again, I the image just came to me because uh, there was one time when I've oh god, I'm trying to remember now. It was when I was really young, and I think me and my friends were at some rink or some shit like that, but we were out like late. And as we were like just goofing around, skating and shit, the big lights started to go off, but not all at once, but one by one.
yeah.
And that sort of general feeling of like the like oh like we got like I don't know. It brought a certain visceral impact to me in terms of an image that I wanted to convey, and what other image does that like relate to other than like the lights going off on a play, like where the lights go down and the story's over. So it's wasn't meant to be a literal interpretation that the entire thing was a stage play. Um, you know, there are only ever, I think, two characters together at one time. Even when Lisa goes to Julia's house, it's I think there's not. I think they're in like separate rooms or something like that. So at a stage play, because I actually, when I was in high school, I saw one of our drama club put on an entire interpretation of the Chronicles of Narnia or the Narnia story, whatever it's actually called, uh, with two people. They just constantly swapped out costumes, which was an absolute nightmare to watch. But no, it's so you could argue that it's like just this two-person play of people swapping out role, whatever for the side characters and this and that. Um, it's an insanely interesting theory. One that's actually rivaled by one in friend session that I think Hans brings up a lot, where everybody is
I know of it.
ghosts.
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, the ghost theory. I love that theory. But it's no, it's I I did not intend for it to be a literal stage play, fucking Paper Mario, where like the curtain rises and closes. But it's a supremely good observation, for sure, and sort of a picking up on just how literal a metaphor could be. And at the very end, when I talk about this figurative thing and how it could actually play into the story itself, which to me just means that it fit the scene all that much better. But it's very interesting, very very interesting.
Yeah, and I remember that he at JCCW said that it was it was the first story he'd ever read that like set it apart from the rest of the stories, and showed him what stories could really be, and it was the inspiration for him to start writing.
Nice.
So yeah, it is, and that, honestly, like that is, it's such a rare thing to even get a fan theory of the story like that. That is
Yeah.
such a rare thing. Like people invest in the story so much that they actually come up with their own headcanon about what is actually going on, whether it is true or not. It is
Mm,
that alone should say a lot about the legacy that your story has had.
yeah. I think Two Worlds is one of those things, and I've experienced it with movies as well, where you watch it and you're kind of like, wow, that was like great, but you're still like cognizant of some of like maybe they should that I got wrong this and then, but it sort of like ages in your mind, and then once you start thinking about it, you're like, oh fuck, wait a minute, like that, you know, that did actually have like a lot of stuff, and like wow, like that
Hmm.
was actually this for the time, and whatever. I think it's sort of aged like that. I think that's why even given the low view count, it's stuck with people. Um, but but no, it's super great just to have somebody even think something like that of something that I've written, and even attempt to make a fan theory. And I listen. I'm just a writer. Everybody can think what they want. There's some open. There might be some open things. Maybe something I didn't think about, or what. But at least with my intention, no, it
Yeah.
wasn't there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you should take it as a what's the word? Why does this always happen to me?
Compliment
I
or
ask it almost every single podcast. Why does it always happen to me? Um, at the end of the day, you should just take it as
as a, you being right. You're right.
not you being right, but like just the fact that people are invested in the story and
Yeah.
they
See.
care about it enough to even come up with their own decisions on what's actually going on. Just I guess
100%.
just to restate what I said before, because I think that's exactly what I said before in different words. Um, all right, so here is the probably the meatiest thing of this entire podcast, and I know Hans is listening, so he's going to be listening very intently for this. So I'm going to keep drawing it out, so he has to keep listening to whatever I have to say before I get into it.
That reminds me of another tangent that I could go into for another hour. Back in my day. No, no, no. Keep going.
so, so I wrote this out just to make sure I got it as clear as possible. So here it is. Two worlds, and to a larger extent, most of your catalog of writing seems to be dominated by binaries. You have the
There you go.
title itself, Lisa and Julia being almost complete opposites, two endings to the story, even the first letters of their names, J and L. Not a single moment where more than two major characters are interacting. As a few examples, though plenty are littered throughout. You've been studying business for a long time and numbers, yet you don't care for numbers and views as an example of a binary in yourself. Did you plan for this to happen? Was it a happy accident? How did the binaries work their way in?
I will finally answer Hans Gutherson. And forgive me, I've had time to think about this before I've come on here, so I do have a sort of prepared answer to this. The answer is binaries never start as binaries. Binaries start from the development of one thing and the glaringly obvious counterpoint and opposite to it. I did have the idea of having two separate people in two worlds. And maybe you could argue that's the ultimate original. But in terms of what the characters became, they existed because I started to think about what I wanted from Lisa, and it created a natural opposite and a natural sort of binary between two elements. So one is never created without the consideration of the other. And I'll actually go as far as to say that one creates the other. Like, I create something that is extremely distinct, and then I think about the opposite. And I really want to do it because I love that sort of element of having two things put next to each other and having them having to coincide. And that sort of element has sort of taken over a lot of my style and my writing and some of the character dynamics that end up forming between friend sessions, because the characters that end up forming are sort of binaries in and of itself, in and of themselves rather. One is created and one naturally spawns from that, and that dynamic is something that I'm infatuated with. I could also say from a different angle as well that from a sort of, I almost want to use the term aesthetic, but I'm not sure if I mean that as the exact wording, but I like when you're able to put two things next to each other. I like stories that are about two forces clashing.
Juxtaposing themselves.
It's 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 like I like Naruto is Naruto and Sasuke. You could cut out everything else, and it's still a sort of story about those two, Light and L. Like the most popular, I think, in most things that have influenced me are stories about two central opposite sort of characters, ideas, things, and how they mix and mingle. So from a creative process, I create binaries when I create one thing and the opposite becomes clear and the opposite becomes so tangible in my head that I have to make it. And that was much of the design in terms of the Friend Sessions characters. And once I kind of got my feet, it really became the main driving force between how Lisa and Julia really came to be. But from in just in general, okay, like if that's true, like why do you keep doing it? It's because it's because like I love it. Like what else would I do? Like of course they're gonna be opposites. Like it's no fun if they're not. Like that's almost as like I guess maybe that's why it goes into like the aesthetic part of it, where it's like that's what makes the most interesting stories is when you have these two characters that are the most completely opposites from each other's, and you either have them fight or you have them get together, and both of those create very interesting story threads. It's a genuine part of me that I never really thought of until Hans brought it up, and it's something that I've sort of realized is littered throughout my process. It's hard for me to make something and not think about what the opposite would be and not think and try to integrate the I think you mentioned juxtaposition there,
Yeah.
like what would be the sort of antithesis to that. It's something that's always pervaded my mind and something that is both in my process and what I like to consume.
Have you ever read Bleach?
No.
Read it.
Uh,
It's just to get to the Thousand Year Blood War arc. Read it all the way through because one of the characters. So, in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, a lot of the antagonists have these powers that are defined by a letter that is given to them by their ruler, and one of the people who gets these powers, I guess, really who enhances their own powers, who is part of the original friend group from before, gets the letter A. And so all of these letters stand for something. And so the A stands for antithesis. And so
oh
I
God,
guarantee you would absolutely love the
I
one
would.
fight between the balance and the antithesis. You would love it.
You might be the singular person in this universe that might convince me to watch Bleach.
Don't watch it,
Just
read it.
read it. Okay, that's
Yes.
okay. Because yeah, because I heard some very iffy things.
Well, I
So
mean, number one, you can't watch the Thousand Year Blood War arc yet because it's not released on anime. That's the number one thing.
yeah.
But also, the manga is the way to go if you're trying to watch or read Japanese things. It's manga is the way to
Hmm.
go.
it's it's the origin. It'd be no
Yes.
anime without manga.
Yes, it's the source material. But yes, I 100% like you would love that scene
Probably would.
between
Probably
the
would. I love that
balance and
shit.
the antithesis. That is what it is. I think
Those are the best
that's
stories.
yeah. Yeah, that I'm out of notes. I'm out of questions. So that it was. Do you have
Wow.
anything else that you want to talk about regarding Two Worlds?
Um. I'll say a couple things.
Okay.
Not too long. I'm just
No,
gonna
go for
say a
it.
couple things about them.
Talk as long as you want.
Um, Mainly just I just want to sort of echo something that I said earlier, where it's I I very much view Two Worlds, and I think people should view Two Worlds as a sort of benchmark for myself and sort of a progression that I get as a writer. I do think I know people have opinions about what specific part is their favorite. I do think the story does get better as it goes on, or at the very least, the actual quality of my writing gets better as it goes on. So, in a way, you can sort of see me start to figure things out in terms of ideas and how intense, not intense, where I want characters to go. And I think that's the most value it has for me. But I just think in general, it should be appreciated as that. Because I do think there is a lot that you can be very critical with it. I myself, when rereading it, cringe at a lot of lines. Probably has my least favorite line in any Wedgie story ever fucking existed, which helped propel the fucking theory, anyways. The JCCW has, which is, I think you all know what's coming next. The dirt list.
Ah,
The
yes, that
dirt
was one of
list.
them.
Yeah, my least favorite line in
Wow.
any fucking story. So it's rough in a lot of ways. So I think viewing it with the proper context for anybody who hasn't read it would help in terms of the enjoyment. It's actually something that I wrote and actually finished so long ago. I've kind of not forgot about it, but it's definitely occupied much less of my mind, and I'm kind of happy that I was able to go back and really think about the thought process and the effort that I went into it with, because with anything that I do, there is a thought process and there is an effort that goes in. I don't do anything half-assed. I had to rush one commission story, and Hans would never let me live it down. Um, but but no, I put my heart and soul into everything that I write, and I think when I go back into the mindset that I had when writing that, it does sort of make me appreciate it more, because it sort of has been a sort of story for me that's always been a, yeah, it was okay, but just like whatever. His first time, it was all right. It was, in hindsight, it's kind of shit, whatever. But like going through back, I think it's sort of, especially rereading it before and then talking about it now, it has taught me a lot about just how much effort and thought I did put in when I originally did it, and it should be remembered as that. And I really hope that if anything that I've ever written inspires anybody, it purely inspires them to do whatever they want, and to specifically, when they're thinking about a line to possibly cross, that, oh, is this too much? Is this too dramatic? Is this, maybe we should pull back? If I have taught anybody anything, or if I've influenced anybody anything, it's just do it. Just write it. Just go for it. Even if, oh, but it's not really grounded, it doesn't matter. Like, we're writers. We're writing worlds here. Like, they can occupy different spaces. Like, just do it. And if I'm remembered specifically for just that, it's like, well, it's not, AnimePanties. He's not everybody's cup of tea, but fuck, when he goes all in, he goes all in. That that means something to me, and I'd much rather be remembered for that than somebody who gets so to the point of catering that their audience starts to like they start to lose their audience because, well, this isn't exactly the typical wedgie story that I like, so maybe include a few more next time. That's I go patently against that. So no, I hope it's remembered for the right reasons. I hope that it has touched people and inspired people to go out, do what they want, to write what they want, and it completely changed my life personally. It was a part of a greater movement that helped our community evolve to become the realistically powerhouse that it is today. And it's only going to get bigger. And I think we might not be able to appreciate that. You know, it is gonna. I think our fetish can be something, and I think it will be something. And to be the fact that I was there on the ground floor, I'll always have my little my little stamp, my little certificate of I was there, and my I was there was releasing Two Worlds. So thank you, young AP, for fucking writing it, for not being lazy, for fucking actually doing it, and completely, completely changing my life.
Yeah, you absolutely accomplished all of the things that you were hoping that the story would do. You've inspired
Mm.
people to write. You've inspired people to do better than they have. You've shown people really. You've along with the other stories that came out at the time. You've
Mm.
shown people what can really be done, building upon what has been given before, and
Mm.
you've allowed a yet greater class of writers to exist. The one thing I will say, never forget Julia taking the picture of herself. That is absolutely one of the greatest and best points of any story that I can think of. It's truly one of the best examples of introspection and characterization that I can think of. And I get not even like, thinking like along Julia, but a completely different thing. Like as a very last thing, she's been angry the entire story, and I could not understand why. Like, it made no sense to me at all. And then you gave us the part where it finally revealed where she's actually a lesbian, and just a thousand levels beyond the fact that it is just a lesbian in a wedgie story. That's hot. Like, yeah, okay, that's the base level. Like, way beyond that, the fact that you built up so much anger and resentment towards herself now that you know what is really going on, like you can understand it's resentment towards herself and it's just projected outwards. Like that also is one of the like just the whole story like honestly like the whole story like you do focus on Lisa quite a bit, and I know it's your favorite character, but the story really does feel like Julia. It feels like the story is centered around Julia coming to terms with her homosexuality, and that is it is truly one of the greatest examples of writing of like when you're looking at Julia and her whole arc throughout. I think it really is one of the greatest examples of writing in this community to this day.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'll actually, if you allow me, say one last thing about that.
Absolutely.
Is it's uh, it was mentioned on the it was briefly mentioned on the podcast, and Hans did rightfully bring it up that not like more than a year or so later, I came to terms with myself that I was a bisexual,
Yes.
and I it was it was very early, um, compared to when I fully realized it. So it's tough to say like, oh, I always knew I was, this way, and then, I wanted an outlet. But I think I had an infatuation with the character having that sort of struggle,
Mm.
to accept themselves. And I think that's also partly why the ending that I chose was the ending that I chose, because I think I wanted that happy ending for myself as well. But it is something that I wouldn't know it yet, but would be innately personal to my just progression as a human being. And I think that might be why I handled it with the attention and delicacy and just the attention that I gave it.
Yeah.
And it's something that I always, look back on, and when I reread some of the passages, it just in terms of like, Julia having a lot of trouble accepting that, and some of it mostly just based on the stigmas.
A little.
That was, some stuff. Yeah, she had some issues. But mainly just actually the most relevant is probably just looking for a different angle. Like, no,
Yes.
no, no, I'm not gay. I'm into wedgies. No, you're not. Like, no, you're not. Like, it's like, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Like, it's just
Yeah.
not. So, like, it's, it's, it was a huge thing for me because in that, I think, especially in this process, I did think to myself, like, oh, am I this or am I not? Maybe I just haven't found that special girl or this and that, and the
Yeah.
classic sort of in essence sort of almost homophobic sort of ideas that have become ingrained, which is like, oh no, you're not gay, you just haven't found the right woman yet, and stuff like that. When you know clearly it was something else. And I say that, being happily married now, to my lovely wife, but she understands that, and it's not something that I've completely dropped from myself, and I'll still identify to this day
No, no,
as that.
that's not something you should ever drop from you. It's part of your identity. It's part of
Well,
yourself. You can't drop
there's a
it
lot
from
of
you.
it's mainly just within the community there, like the LGBTQ plus community. There is a genuine, like, and there's been a lot of pushback, but there is still oh, you're bi and you're in a straight relationship, you're not bi. Like, it's
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
there is a genuine, like, there is a sort of pushback on that,
Hmm.
because there's this idea of what is gay,
Right.
and like, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
so it gets sort of problematic when it comes to that, which is
Yeah.
again why it's something that, to me, like, I'm happily married, I am still a bisexual, that's a part of me. And in a way, it well, in a different sort of way, but it becomes a part of, it becomes a, like, Julie accepts that it's a part of her, and it is a sort of element that I think people might forget when they think about the story. I
Yes.
think they think a lot
Yes.
about the Lisa and the manipulation and the big, and the drama and the whatever, but it is at its core, uh, a story about Julia coming to terms with being a lesbian, which is
Yes.
actually wholly disconnected from Wedgies all in particular, which might
Absolutely.
have been
Yes.
why it helps how people stick. It helps
Yes.
why, like, fuck. I mean, my first Wedgie fetish story wasn't even a Wedgie fetish story. That's how groundbreaking it was. But no, it
Well,
still it still had them through.
well, you had wedgies in the story. That's why people think of it as.
Mm.
But yes, at the core,
That's a whole nother
it
conversation. That's a
really
whole other
is.
podcast. What
Yes.
is a wedgie fetish story? Is it just
Yeah.
one that has wedgies in it, or does it have to be centralized? Some people
Yeah.
disagree.
That is true. Um, yeah, I'll just say this. It is interesting, and I've seen it that the people that are seen as the most tolerant can be some of the most intolerant. But anyway, um, yeah. So just if anything, if you have any takeaways from this story, this is the number one. Reread the story. After you've
Yeah.
read the story, reread it so you have
Yeah.
a completely different understanding. Because that is a hallmark of some of the greatest works in history, not just in wedgie literature, but in general. Like Cowboy Bebop, absolutely one of the greatest anime of all time. But to truly fully understand it, you need to rewatch it so you have the
Yes, you do.
understanding of the ending, and then you can go
Yeah.
back and what happens, and you can like, okay, this happens and this, and it's the same thing with Two Worlds. And
Yeah.
just remember the Julia picture scene because it's one of the greatest writings of a character in history that I've ever seen. You might disagree. If you do, leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you thought of either of these episodes, because this will be split in 2 episodes. Leave a comment, leave a favorite, leave a like. Tell me what you want to hear. Tell me if you'd like to be on the podcast. If you have something you'd like to say but you don't want to be on the podcast, send me a recording of what you want to say. It might end up on here. And so with that, I will leave you off on this. Thank you so much, AnimePanties, for coming on this episode, discussing Two Worlds with me, getting an entirely different perspective from the previous episode, getting a look at the writer's perspective as opposed to just the reader's. It is entirely a hugely different perspective and much more important aspect of the story.
Huge. Huge. I'm glad to be here. Glad you had me on. Thank you.
And I'm hoping and looking forward to future episodes with you. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I will see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club. Goodbye.